This is a pan of my workspace. Here are my note cards. Sports. They have been a highlight in many Americans' lives, including myself, and I've always enjoyed watching them throughout the weeks. And I did this until about mid-March of 2020. And the reason that it stopped then was because that's when COVID-19 started to spread across the United States and caused many sports to have to cancel the rest of their seasons. Now, in this speech, we're going to talk about just exactly how COVID-19 was able to stop all sports. We'll also talk about how, since the sports have restarted from COVID-19, they have had to change their regulations. And finally, we're going to talk about how these regulations have affected different players in the industry. So you may be asking yourself, just exactly, how did COVID-19 stop sports? Well, it's kind of simple, actually. Once it started spreading so much, nobody knew how to stop it. So they had to do something. So, and according to Johns Hopkins University, on March 10th of 2020, they published an article called U.S. Coronavirus Cases Surpass 1,000. This is up tenfold from the week previous. And in this article, they talked about how there are roughly 1,000 cases and 23 deaths in the United States as of March 10th, which is right around when the sport started to be canceled. Another thing that happened was the CDC started coming out with many different social distancing guidelines to help stop this spread. So it was only a matter of time that with social distancing to stop the spread and trying to limit interaction with people, that sports gatherings would just have to stop. And now that we have a slight understanding of what COVID is, we can delve into how it affected different professional sports. And according to the Philadelphia Inquirer in May of 2020, they interviewed different journalists who had done articles on COVID-19 sports back in March. One journalist by the name of Marcus Hayes stated, "On March 9th, I wrote a column about the NFL, or the NBA and the NHL, and they weren't going to cancel their next coming up games. And they were just recommending fans not come to them to abide by social distancing. Now, unfortunately for these leagues, by March 13th, it didn't matter what they wanted because all organizations had either canceled their games or postponed their games, which eventually would then be canceled. And the reason that this happened so fast was because most organizations just had no time to prepare. They didn't know what to do to stop the spread, so the best thing was to just stop the games, and that meant nobody would be interacting at all. But with that being said, now you're probably asking yourself, well, if they had to stop it all in the matter of weeks just to stop the spread then why are they coming back with games now? Well, it does help now that there's been a lot of regulation changes. So now every player has to wear masks, and they also are trying to have people quarantine outside of their sporting event. But the people that have done the best would have to be the NBA. And the reason is because the NBA came out with the NBA bubble. And according to Tad Haslin, who was with Sporting News and published an article on August 26th talking about what the NBA bubble was, and he stated that it was basically a quarantine for every team and manager and player and everybody that was needed for these teams in Orlando, Florida from July 7th to the end of the season on October 12th, where none of these players or managers would have any contact with the outside world until the end of the season. And this has pretty much put a stop to all NBA coronavirus cases, unlike other leagues. Another reason that a lot of these sports had to come back is because the sports industry is a huge money-making machine. And according to the ESPN and the CBS Sports Publisher, if sports had not come back, and they would have lost almost $12 billion from merchandising and live TV contracts. And if NFL had not been able to come back recently, that number would have almost doubled. So finally, now that we have understood why sports are back, we can also talk about how they're a little bit different. Because now, unlike back in 2019 and previous seasons, there are no fans at any games, which has put a hindrance on a lot of teams that thrive on supportive fans and fan interaction. But this doesn't also just come with teams. It's also a problem with individual sports, such as golf. Take Tiger Woods, for example. He played in the U.S. Open a few weeks back, and when he plays normal conditions, it's normally hundreds of thousands of people come and watch him. But since he played now during the quarantine, there was no fans to be seen, and he didn't even make the cut. And it's speculated that the reason he played so bad was because he didn't have anybody to support and give him energy that he could thrive through the weekend. And this is speculated with a lot of teams who just don't have people there, and they feel that if they were there, they could have a better advantage with having fans than without. So in conclusion, today we talked about how COVID-19 was able to stop the sporting industry entirely, and also how the sporting industry has fought back against COVID-19 and have new regulations so they can play now. And unfortunately, even though they're playing, there's still different circumstances, such as now we don't have any fans, which has put a hindrance on some people, but overall, I'm just glad to see sports. And hopefully, if we can all keep wearing our masks and keep social distancing, then we can have sports back to normal anytime soon. That'd be great. And here's a pan of my workspace.